Shalom, WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week in Shul, we'll be reading Parshat Noah, and I wanted to share a little bit of insight today about what we call the Noahide Laws, or the basic laws after Noah and his children come out of the ark, right? A story I think we're mostly familiar with on the ark for what seems to be hundreds of days, and they finally come out, and God gives them some instructions, starting on in chapter 9. And there's not a list of laws called the Noahide laws, but the rabbis and scholars tease out some basic principles of how people are supposed to behave from the verses that immediately follow the landing of the ark. And the first one, or one of them, is that you shouldn't kill people, which sounds pretty basic, and we would all agree that that should be on the basic, level of how society should function. People should not run around killing other people, but this isn't like the Ten Commandments, a simple command, thou shalt not kill. It's not even phrased that way. The text reads that, but for your own lifeblood I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast, of man too. Will I require a reckoning for human life, of every man for that of his fellow man? Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Why? Ki b'tselem Elohim asa et ha'adam. Because in the image of God did I make man. So what's happening here is something a little bit different. It's not a law and a punishment as much as it is a principle. And the principle seems to be that human life is valuable, which we may take for granted. But Noah coming off the ark, apparently it was not to be taken for granted. And Leon Kass, the great contemporary scholar, in his book, The Beginning of Wisdom, where he grapples with the issues of Genesis, he talks about this Noah story as yet another creation story, right? In the Garden of Eden, we learned that human beings were made in God's image, but we don't really learn very much about what that means. Maybe it means knowing the difference between good and evil. In the second creation story, it starts in chapter 2. We get a little bit more insight. Human beings can categorize animals and identify them and give them names. And they are tasked with some kind of stewardship for creation. So maybe that's what it means to be made in God's image, the ability to care in a sapient way for the creation. But here, Leon Kass notes that we get a different understanding, a yet a third understanding of what it means to be made in God's image. Right here, we learn that human beings are different from other animals. Right? In this very passage, we learn that God gives us permission to eat animals, to sacrifice animals, also to care for animals, but says that human beings are different. You might think that since you can kill animals, you can also kill people. We're told, no, human beings are different. Not quite godly, but definitely not quite like all the rest of the animals. Here in this moment is framed sort of the human condition, figuring out who we are and where we belong. Not giving in to our impulses and our instincts like other animals. Also, obviously not quite divine, but able to take on divine-like characteristics. Again, this is not a crime and punishment sort of a passage, but it gives us the principle that human beings are special. How do we know it's not crime and punishment? It says if a person sheds blood, by human beings will their blood be shed. But it doesn't sound like punishment. It even says for animals who shed human blood, those animals should be put to death. So something different seems to be happening here, as if the animal had control. It's not so much it's that there is just a simple value placed on humanity and humanity's role in creation. I was thinking about this question, right? So it's not so much, we read the Noahide laws usually as things that you should not do. Don't steal. Don't eat treif. Don't eat the limb of an animal that's still alive. Just kind of icky anyway. Obviously, don't kill. There are some positive ones. Set up a court of law. Make sure that justice can be done for all people. But this is sort of establishing a Noahide principle. And the principle is human life matters, and quite frankly, that all human life matters. Right here, just before God places the rainbow in the sky, which is the next thing that happens, God says everybody is equal. All human life matters, right? This is just a few verses later that God says, I will set up as a covenant between me and you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. I've set my bow in the clouds, right? The keshet, the rainbow, it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. So that's verse 12 of chapter 9. The verses about not shedding blood are verse 5 and 6, right next to each other. The rainbow is not just a sign that God won't destroy the earth. The rainbow is a sign that things in the world have value, and human beings in particular have values, and that value is equal. And so when we see that rainbow now as a sign of equality out in the world, it actually makes great sense from the biblical passage. It's not a symbol of diversity that was adopted out of context. It's a symbol of diversity that was adopted exactly in context. Because what the rainbow reminds us is that all people have value, all people have rights. I think it's particularly important to highlight this in the world we're living in today. People are so often taken advantage of by other people, by governments. Children, right, are suffering. We see it here right in our backyard in Mamaroneck with the results of Tropical Storm Ida, where so many are going without. We still have 120 homeless families right here, newly homeless, displaced by the storm. We're about in Afghanistan as the Taliban takes over again, and girls are being excluded from schools once again. I was reminded of the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, first adopted by the League of Nations in 1929 and then re-adopted with a couple of additions in 1948 after World War II. The Declaration of the Rights of the Child, right? Child must be protected beyond and above all considerations of race, nationality, or creed. That is the number one. And I think it's established right here in our Parshat Noah, right here in the Noahide Laws. As Noah and his sons and their wives and whoever else was on that ark get off the ark, and God says to them, you shall not shed blood, any blood under any circumstances, any human blood under any circumstances. The moral principle of equality has come into being of all humanity. And that is the first of the International Declaration of the Rights of a Child. Child must be protected beyond and above all consideration of race, nationality, or creed. Child must be cared for with due respect for the family as an entity. Right? The family unit should be respected. Third, the child must be given the means requisite for its normal development, materially, morally, and spiritually. Right? It's our job to raise children. Material goods, moral foundations, and spiritual freedom to worship. Child that is hungry must be fed. The child that is sick must be nursed. The child that is mentally or physically handicapped must be helped. The maladjusted child must be re-educated. The orphan and the waif must be sheltered and succored. And fifth, the child must be the first to receive relief in time of distress. Right? We prioritize helping children, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't help everyone else who might also be in distress. And after World War II, from the lessons learned there, 2 of these principles were added. Number 6, the child must enjoy the full benefits provided by social welfare and social security schemes, must receive a training which will enable it at the right time to earn a livelihood, and must be protected against every form of exploitation, which is a major issue in today's world, children being exploited in all kinds of ways. And 7th and last, the child must be brought up in the consciousness that its talents must be devoted to the services of its fellow man, right? We teach children that we rely on each other as human beings. As we read Noah this week, I hope that we can read it not as a children's story, as it is often read. The animals are coming 2 by 2. But instead as a story about children, a story that levels the playing field for all the children of humanity, for all human beings. That when we see that rainbow flag that is purporting, equality, that we don't see it as an alien symbol, but we recognize that symbol is foundational right here in our very own Torah. And that ultimately, it is our job, right here, post-Ida, in the world, as things are shaken up, even in our own families, that it's our job to make sure that that rainbow is not just an aspirational symbol, but can also become an actualized symbol. That kind of moral equivalence, moral equality for all humanity comes into being, and we are part of what enables it to happen. May it come speedily in our days. Shabbat Shalom.